The Shift is brought to you by SE Healthcare. Welcome to The Shift. I'm Dr. Andrea Coyle. Shifties, welcome back to the next episode of The Shift. This is going to be a super exciting episode. I have Nancy Mannion with me. She's a rock star. And we're going to talk a little bit about the House of Representatives. So I'm going to say the word politics. We're going to dive into that, but it's meant to be conversational, a lot of fun. We're going to learn a lot from Nancy. Nancy, welcome to the Shift podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you and welcome all to all you shifties. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share my story about the shifts that I've made in my career and what was the impetus for having those things happen.
I love it. So, Nancy, I'm just going to ask a couple questions. You can walk myself and all the shifties through this shift. I know that you and I had discussed you were an ICU nurse, and then you made a shift into the emergency department. So, can you talk about that?
Yeah, sometimes shifts happen because we make decisions, and sometimes the universe makes decisions for us, or other people see in us what we don't see in ourselves. Now, I had been working in the intensive care unit, and I loved it. This obviously goes back a number of decades, when ICU nursing was still a relatively new specialty. But I've prided myself on my clinical expertise and how savvy I was at managing the emerging technology that we were using in ICU setting, my clinical acumen and being able to identify when patients were kind of swirling and sinking, and others saw that in me. And I was approached by who was at the time a nursing supervisor that I'd worked with quite closely on the off shift. And she said, I'm taking the job as the manager in the emergency department, and I want you to come work in the emergency room with me. And I was like, why would I want to work in the emergency room? This is like the place to be. It's hot, it's happening. There's lots of stuff here in that emergency room. Yeah, it's old. It's in the kind of the basement. I don't know. But she's like, no, really, seriously, you will not regret this. And she was right. I have never regretted the decision that I made to move into emergency nursing. Now, I went from, adult acute intensive care to suddenly taking care of everybody in the community, really young kids, older folks, and every disease process known to man, and then a few others. But it got into me and it got under my skin, and I really understood that I was in the space of an environment that challenged me all the time, that it forced me to make really quick decisions on a limited amount of information, but I thrived in it. And I loved it. Maybe I'm an adrenaline junkie, and I'll proudly wear that title, but I really enjoyed the kind of uncertain nature of what was going to happen in the emergency room. And so that shift landed me in a place where I felt really at home. And it's been my area of clinical practice since that time. So I've got decades of working in the emergency room.
Wow. And you said something that is kind of spinning in my head right now. Someone believed in you. And that's what I think is so important in nursing, Nancy, is that we have to take people under our wing. And someone had took a great leap of faith on me early in my career. And I think as nurse leaders, we've got to keep that as part of our culture. That is a behavior of our culture that is incredibly important, that we take people under our wings, we coach them, we grow them. So I think that's really important. Can you tell us, because you had mentioned to me, you were in the ED, and from the ED is how soon after did you become a past president of the American Emergency Nurses?
So I met a member of the Emergency Nurses Association when I moved to the emergency department. And she kept talking about this group, and they had meetings and they did education sessions. And I was intrigued. I was like, well, tell me more about this, because up until that point in my career, and I was probably now about 5 years into my nursing career, I had not been aware, honestly, that there were nursing organizations, specifically organizations that were focused on clinical areas. And, maybe I lived in a little bubble, but I was intrigued by what she was talking about, and she brought in some textbooks, and I thought, if I really want to be good at being an emergency nurse, I need to get the right education. I need to really understand all of these things. So I got the textbooks, I started attending meetings. I met other people who were more engaged, and again, one of those times where somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, I think you could you could have a role in this organization. You go to a meeting and you never go to the bathroom because while you're in the bathroom, other people are like nominating you to be the chair of a committee, which is exactly what happened for me. And so I became chair of an education committee for a chapter of the Emergency Nurses Association because somebody nudged me again. And from there, that just escalated to being, a leader within my chapter and then a leader within my state. And then I moved from one state to another and I stepped back into being a leader. And then I got involved at the national level. I served on some national committees and through that interacted with the board of directors of the Emergency Nurses Association. And I thought, I can do this. I want to be in the room where decisions are made that are really defining what practice is like for emergency nurses. I wanted that seat at the table. I wanted that voice at the table. And so I, served as a chair of a national committee. And at the conclusion of that term, I put my name in to run as a candidate, and I was elected to the ENA board of directors. And it was undoubtedly one of the most transformative experiences of my career to be involved at the national level, influencing practice and policy, and really being able to see that what you're doing and the decisions you're making make a difference for everybody, not just for my own practice, but for everybody that was, whether they were a member of ENA or not, this was going to help them. And so, as I served on that board, then I kind of, again, I just saw myself being able to lead the organization. And so after, serving for a couple of years, I put my name in to run as an officer and progress through that. And really, it was a privilege, really a privilege of my life to be able to serve as that national leader. And it opened immense doors that really created opportunities in my career I would have never had. So I'm always grateful for ENA and what it offered to me in terms of that. But
And
I just
it's
want to go back and say, but why did Nancy join all these things? And I think it goes back. I would just want to give a shout out to my family because my dad was a big influence in my life. And he was that guy in the community that when things weren't working right or something needed to be done, people would say, let's go ask Joe, because Joe will know how to fix it. Joe will know what to do, or Joe will run it. So food banks, clothing drives, community, picnics. My dad was the chair. But he didn't just stop at being the chair. He made sure his children, my brothers and I, were also there working, whether we were sorting shoes and jackets into boxes that were, collected for a clothing drive or working at the community fair. We learned early on that being a servant leader was a really important part of being able to pay it forward and to give back to the community that's been so generous to us. So part of my leadership journey really evolved out of that sense of being able to do better for more people.
Oh my God, big shout out to Mr. Joe and what a great job he did. Very influential. And it's really thank goodness for Joe, or we wouldn't even be having this conversation. It's
It's
so
absolutely
amazing.
true. Like,
Um, thank you for that. And thank you for sharing that little personal piece. I have a question. So emergency room nurse, emergency department nurse, ENA, how did Nurse on Board Coalition, how did that shift come about? And can you tell the shifties a little bit about Nurse on Board Coalition? Because I think it's important.
yeah. So let me start with that. The Nurses on Boards Coalition has been in existence for 11 years, and it came out of some of the work that was being done around the future of nursing work that was funded through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the American Nurses Association. And a group of leaders, nurses, came together and said, one of the ways we can enact this future of nursing and really firmly embed nursing into the culture of America is by really focusing on how nurses bring that professional mindset into the community. And so our mission statement has really never changed since its origin, and it is to improve the health of communities through the service of nurses on boards. So when you think about community health, think about Pop Warner football and how a nurse serving on a Pop Warner football at a community level can influence the safety of children who play sports. Because that nurse is going to bring, hey, let's look at the guidelines that the American Academy of Pediatrics put together. Let's look at the sports medicine, guidelines for protecting children when they're playing sports. We want them to have fun, but hey, there's a lot of risk for head injury. Imagine how a nurse can influence a community's health and make sure that kids are safe. On the other end of the spectrum, how about a nurse serving on the Meals on Wheels board, making sure in their community that our vulnerable elders have a good nutritional base, that they're getting the food that they need so that they can maintain their health, especially if they have challenges. And it's not just delivering a meal to them. It's also about kind of checking in. It's about socialization. It's like, hey, do you need other things in your home? Are you able to get around? Do you have mobility issues? Nurses are so holistic that when we look at community health, we see it all. And so, the mission of serving our community really resonated with me. I think partly because as an emergency nurse, we were that intersection between the community and the healthcare system. And so it was very natural for me. So it was through my relationship with ENA. I was a past president. I was a member of the Academy of Emergency Nursing. And they put a call out when they joined the Nurses on Boards Coalition and said, we need a representative. And once again, I raised my hand and said, I'm really interested in this. I had served on other boards in my community. I'd served on EMS boards. I served on my church board. So I understood a little bit about leadership and governance, in addition to my role as a nurse leader in the healthcare system. And I really enjoyed that kind of focus on community. So I raised my hand, and ENA appointed me to serve as the representative of the Nurses on Boards Coalition. And, the rest is history, as they say. So I rose to become an officer and have had the privilege for the last year and a half, 2 years, to serve as its chair. So we have made big strides. We worked through COVID. How can nurses really support organizations in their communities as they're struggling? So we work at that local level, but we also go regional and national. We've had nurses serving on industry boards. We've had people working with United Way at the national level. We work with Alzheimer's Association and so many other things. So it's not just about serving on the Emergency Nurses Association board, but it's really about integrating nursing into our communities at all levels.
I think you did a fabulous, fabulous explanation of how that works. And I love how you integrated. Um, I say this all the time, Nancy, in one of my presentations. I believe nurses rule the world. I believe we make the impossible possible. And I believe that every industry across the globe needs the voice of a nurse. And I
Agree.
honestly believe that. I believe it. And so you just explained very eloquently
Yeah.
exactly what I'm saying in 3 sentences. So thank you for that. Okay, next, this is what I'm really excited about. We've already talked about a couple of your shifts, but now you have another big shift. And you are a current candidate for the House of Representatives for the state of Pennsylvania, which is my home state. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Can you tell the shifties about that?
It is very exciting. I've done a lot of things in my career. I've been a leader at, all kinds of levels. Um, it wasn't really on my bingo card to be a politician. But as I saw what was happening, particularly around healthcare, after January of 2025, and the threats that were happening within the current administration's budgets, the appointment of someone who does not have any background in healthcare, does not have any background in medical care, being appointed to serve as Health and Human Services Secretary when the lives of Americans really depend on the work that that organization does, that the CDC does. And, when we saw scientists being fired from their work, and when we saw changes happening in the way that we would represent the United States in like the World Health Organization. I thought, so many times in my career, I would lean on the advice of the CDC to guide me through things that were happening. We had an anthrax scare few years ago. We had an Ebola scare, and the solid source of information for that came from our federal government. And I want to preserve that. I believe that we need highly qualified people guiding the health of America. And I didn't see that happening. And then I began to hear and see the proposed changes to things that really act as the social safety net in America. Food programs like SNAP, Medicaid, which helps our most vulnerable. And it's not just, moms and kids, but a lot of our very vulnerable seniors are on Medicaid because they are on a limited income. Their Social Security may be their only source of income. And when they are at that stage, they need that supplement. And when I saw kind of the proposals and what was happening, I thought, you know what? Congress could use a few nurses to really stand up for the communities and the community health and the public's health. And we need advocates, and nurses really are. Andrea, and I know nurses are advocates. It's at our core of our being is that we're always trying to protect our patients and seek what's best for them. And I thought, okay, I've been advocating for patients in my communities, in my community board service, and nationally in my national leadership roles. So I took a big, deep breath and said, you know what? I think I can help influence America. And so I have chosen to run for Congress to represent my district here in Pennsylvania because I believe that we can do better, that we need the expertise of nurses. We need the calm, rational decision making that nurses bring, the scientific knowledge that nurses bring, and our trust in evidence-based practice to say this is how we can make a path forward. It may not ever be perfect, but it's possible to be a whole lot better than it is. And so that's really my driving passion about why I've chosen to go into this, I don't know, deep end of the pond, I guess, to say, why am I running for Congress? Because I believe I can make a difference. And I believe that America needs nurses. If America is being portrayed as, it's failing and it's on life support, then who better than a nurse to resuscitate it?
Oh my
So
gosh.
that's why I'm running.
I love it. That was amazing. I'm sorry, you were going to say something else, Nancy?
Well, I just, the other thing that I keep thinking about is, it takes a lot of backbone to be a congressperson, right? Because there's a lot of people demanding things from you, and you have to know your own North Star. And I think about nurses, and I think about the nurses that I've known who have stood up for their patients against all odds and said, no, this isn't the right thing to do. We can do better. And it takes backbone, and nurses have it. And that's what I bring to Congress. I'm going to stand up for the things that matter to our patients, to our communities, to help us, not to hurt us. We live in a country of abundance, and yet we're made to
Mhm.
think that everything is in scarcity. And
Scarcity.
I don't believe that. We
I
have so much we can share. More for you is not less for me. We have enough. And so I want to bring that kind of mindset to the work that I do to help guide the decisions that our country is making about protecting the vulnerable, about making sure that those who are in a hard space can get their feet on the ground and move forward. We are the land of opportunity, and I'm bound and determined to make sure that we do that for our people.
Well, I can tell you, and this is for shifties will understand this, but people that aren't nurses, the ED in your role, ED nurses have, oh my gosh, backbones made of steel. And there's so much tremendous advocacy in the ED environment. I was thinking of all these ways you can advocate in the ED space, and you can advocate for the communities and any space in healthcare, but ED, you are literally the portal of entry into a hospital.
Mhm.
And the other thing I was thinking about is, SE Healthcare, we're a software burnout company, and I was thinking all these great nurses, advocates, and how we make the impossible possible, but we're still burning out.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts in this new role that you're aspiring to achieve on how we can mitigate and help balance burnout so that we keep all this great talent in healthcare?
I've heard often, and I really believe this is true, the phrase that the antidote to despair is action. And I think that one way we help ourselves to recover and to gain back our center and our groundedness as nurses, because we are a giving profession. We give of ourselves to our patients, to our coworkers all the time. And sometimes that leaves us a bit empty. And we look around and say, I can't make a difference. But we can, one nurse at a time. And bound together, we are huge. We are a huge influence on our country. I mean, there are more nurses in America than there are physicians, than there are many other professions. We have a huge factor of impact that we can make if we rise up and say, this is what we envision for our nation to look like, for our healthcare system to look like. And so action is really the way to get past that sense of despair, that sense of nothing will ever change, because your one action multiplied by a couple million other actions becomes a big movement. So I'd say, yes, feel for yourself, understand your own feelings, but don't get lost in it. Step up, speak out for what's right, and find your posse. Find the people who are going to hold you up when you're not feeling so good, and likewise do that for others, because together we're stronger.
And do you believe, Nancy, that when you are involved in boards and decision making, such as shared governance, do you think that helps balance that feeling of I'm not making a difference? Because the minute you feel like as a nurse, you're not making a difference, I think people start to struggle and some burnout might set in because you're working so hard, but then it's what's the use? So do you feel like there's a big benefit in nurses becoming involved?
Well, again, I think action is really an antidote to feeling hopeless. I think that we often, as nurses, also, because we are very much about giving of ourselves all the time, that we don't take the time to reflect on what we've actually accomplished. And I think if you, as an individual, step back and just look at what you've done, it may not seem like a lot to you, but to that one person that you helped, to those families that you supported, it meant the world to them. So I think never underestimate what your impact is as a nurse, because you've changed lives, you've saved lives, you've helped people through times of grief, through times of sorrow. And, we get empty. And we need to learn how to fill our cup up when we feel a little depleted. And that's why we need to have our wing people giving us a little boost under our wings when we're feeling a little down. But it is, to me, the ability to recognize the good that you've done is really how you can build yourself back up. You just need to look yourself in the mirror every morning and tell yourself that you are smart and you are kind and you are important. Give yourself some affirmation for the good work that you do. And that's my message to the shifties. Y'all are doing amazing work, every single one of you, every single day. And we give so much that we don't often reflect on what it is that we've done. So take a little look in the mirror and give yourself a big pat on the back.
Thank you for saying that. I think it's important sometimes to take a look in the mirror, to your point, and maybe even after you look at yourself in the mirror or before, it doesn't matter, write down, like reflect on the differences you've made, the shifts that you made that are for good. It's all about perspective. There's so much perspective. We could sit here and get lost in all the things that are negative, but why? It's exhausting. We as nurses have so much to do, so much knowledge, so much skill set that literally we could change the world. And I
Oh,
think you're
yes,
going to
we
do it.
can. I'm gonna try. I'm
I,
I'm I'm in it for the win, because I really believe that We need more nurses, bringing that compassion, bringing that caring, having the ability to see the whole person and not just a label upon someone. Political party, disease, diagnoses. We see the whole person, and that kind of advocacy mindset helps us really, I think, drive the change that we need to see in our country.
Nancy, thank you so much. This was really exciting. I really appreciate all your knowledge. And I have a special request. After the election, whatever the outcome, would you be willing to come back and speak with the Shifties and just walk us through the experience of a lifetime?
I sure will. Be happy to do that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And thank you again, Nancy and Shifties. Remember, your shift makes the difference. Keep shifting. Enjoying the shift? Help us reach more nurse leaders by rating and reviewing us on your podcast app. It takes just a minute, but makes a big impact. Search for The Shift, tap those stars, and share what you love. Your feedback shapes our future episodes and helps others discover us. Remember, rate, review, and amplify the shift today.